Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this evening. Got a great stream for you guys. We're going to be getting into a few different issues that the military are facing. We've got a concerning open letter, a chief diversity officer with a very it's the kind of pass you'd expect, I guess, but still, obviously a problem. And then we're also going to be talking about kind of the Biden administration and the way that they are treating soldiers, especially when it comes to their financial issues, telling them to go on food stamps and this kind of thing. We'll be addressing all that, and of course, for that, one of my favorite co-hosts, American Ostrakon. Thank you for joining me, sir.
As always, Auron, it is a pleasure to be here.
We're going to be getting deep into the military issues, and of course, you have a good military background, well known for kind of that. But I think while we're kind of letting everyone file in,
Sure.
let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Martha's Vineyard, right? Because this is kind of the
Oh,
news
yeah,
of the
let's do
day.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure most of you guys already know this, but Ron DeSantis sent a plane of illegal immigrants from his area up to Martha's Vineyard.
Approximately 45, and that's going to be significant when we talk about this.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
point to me pointing out that money. Anyway,
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Very interesting. We of course know that the governor of Texas has been doing this for a while. Greg Abbott has been sending busloads of illegal immigrants to Washington D.C. and I believe Chicago as well. And of course, there's been a lot of whining, a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. Oh, we can't handle this. Our infrastructure is overtaxed. Blah blah blah. All the things that, of course, all these border states have been saying forever and are like, wow, why can't you guys, understand that when it's impacting us? A lot of mixed feelings from people on the right about this project. Some people hate it. They think that they're shipping people further into the country and it's just a stunt. Other people say, it's good optics. It forces kind of progressives to show how actually intolerant of this they are and how actually they don't want it at all. But this Martha Vineyards one is very interesting. This one really blew up in a way that the other ones have not. I think some of that might be because it's Ron DeSantis and he's kind of the second behind Trump, and it's really important for him to be labeled, a fascist or whatever too, because he's the guy if Trump isn't the guy. But I think another big factor is, of course,
Semi-fascist.
I'm sorry.
That's their new favorite term.
Yes, there's a modifier. How ridiculous of me to cut that out.
Diet Coke of fascism.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's got the NutraSweet or whatever in there, so it's probably even worse for you. The semi-fash is even worse. But the interesting thing with the reaction with Martha's Vineyard is, of course, this is like a ground, like a home base for a lot of progressives. There's a lot of vacationing here. This is a spot for many of our ruling class to go and kind of live the lives that they want to deny to the average American. Small communities that are cohesive, that are that work together. These kind of things have social fabric. This is the kind of stuff. This is where they escape to their multi-million-dollar compounds to kind of enjoy this and get away from kind of the hellscapes they've created in a lot of these progressive cities. And this sent them into like a full-blown panic. Like they were screaming at the top of their lungs, like, how could you use political or use humans as political pawns? How this is so inhumane. I saw some people calling it kidnapping, human trafficking. Suddenly very comically talking about the infrastructure. They don't have the infrastructure in Martha's Vineyard to deal with under 50 illegal immigrants. It's like going to collapse the entire thing. And then the best part is they managed to last barely over 24 hours, and they've now escorted those immigrants out of Martha's Vineyard with a military escort. They called the National
courtesy
Guard
of the local National
Massachusetts.
Guard.
Yeah.
Massachusetts, thank you. The Massachusetts National Guard, they mobilized 300 of them which is yeah, about a company-sized element, to exfiltrate 45 people from their little island, which is yeah, it's they got no problem. That's expensive, right? Mobilizing a bunch of National Guardsmen and taking them away from their day jobs in order to quickly and safely, or quickly and quietly relocate some 45 people from an
Well, and
island. Like,
it's what,
sure.
like 5 or 6 guardsmen per
I
immigrant,
mean,
right?
right? Yeah, exactly. At that point, it's like that's an impressive ratio you got there.
Yeah, and,
Well,
and and these people who couldn't, there's no National Guard on the border, of course, because red states, border towns, they don't deserve any kind of National Guard response to benefit them or keep them safe. They're, no National Guard when people are burning down your city during riots. But we can get we can immediately, instantaneously mobilize the National Guard to remove 45 illegal immigrants from every progressive's favorite vacation spot.
which, by the way, like, no indication of them being belligerent or violent, or like there's the I'm talking about the immigrants, the illegal immigrants.
Right,
Like,
right.
there's nothing that they've done, right, other than exist. And yet they felt the need to get them out of there very, very quickly on buses, and yeah, with a 6-to-1 military to compliant civilian ratio on that one. So yeah, it serves their purposes. It's they'll do what they want with the military, and it is what it is at that point. I think it's a great segue into the rest of our conversation,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to
about
bring it
using
up.
about using the military. They've got no yeah, they have no pause to use military for whatever means that they want to use them for, which really goes well into when it comes to that open letter that we shall discuss fairly soon.
Yeah, you really see them just using him as like private police force, right? Like they like
Yeah,
we need you guys to clean these immigrants off our streets, right? Like that's
we
like
don't care for their kind around here.
yeah, right. And I wanted to make it very clear because there's a lot of people again very mixed on the optics of this. A lot of we of course from the left we hear all the things you'd expect. Oh, I thought you guys were Christians. What are you doing with it? Yeah, all these people who hate religious people now they want to hold them. Like, oh, aren't you? Aren't you doing what Jesus would do? And then like 24 hours later, they're shuffling these people off to a military barracks
Yeah,
somewhere, a
listen,
military
they
detention.
don't want poor people around them. Okay,
Right.
it's not
Yeah.
that difficult to figure out.
No, it's not at all. But
Uh,
but a lot of people were mixed on the optics because they said, okay, we don't want to be shipping these people into the middle of the country. And I just want to make a case here. First, I'm not 100% one way or another on this policy. So
What's
so
another
I'm
45 at this point?
That's kind of
Like,
where my point's going to be. Yeah, exactly.
okay.
You've got thousands, tens of thousands of these people pouring over the border every year at this point, and what is 45 of them being shipped north going to do? Like, I understand this is my problem with a lot of conservatives and even people in the more dissident right, is they're always thinking small ball, they're always thinking nuts and bolts. They're like, well, what about the practical of part of shipping 45 people north? It's like, yeah, that's not the problem. Like if it was 45 immigrants, we'd probably be just fine. But the problem is the tens of thousands, and if you can make a statement with 45, then I think that
Then
that
so
matters
be it.
way more. Like, not obviously these
Yeah.
people don't fix the problem, right? Like this doesn't fix anything, but the point is it really makes people get unhinged about it. It really forces the left to this, and of course we all know hypocrisy is not the issue. And I told people, like, if you just make this the Dems are the real racists, then you've wasted the opportunity. You've wasted the narrative. The point is to show that no one actually wants their neighborhood changed by mass migration. And this isn't even mass migration. This is 45 people. But nobody wants this. Not the people who claim it, not the people who are always talking about diversity as our strength. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this in their neck of the woods. They're willing to use it as a weapon against people who are their political enemies and force them to bear the cost and force them to deal with the social issues and force them to deal with the accompanying crime. Because, like you said, these people hadn't done anything, right? They're just there. But we do know that
they existed.
Right, but we know in many of these towns, they're these border towns. They're filled with drugs. They're filled with crime. People are killed. They're killed by drunk drivers who are there illegally. They're murdered by illegal immigrants. Like this is a real tragedy in many parts of the country, and these people couldn't just handle them like walking around their streets for a day.
And that's the whole point, isn't it? Right? It's just not in my backyard. And they're pointing. I feel it is a bit of a lost cause trying to point out the hypocrisies of progressives, but why not? Like it costs, the cost was relatively low, and it showed on a global stage what they're really like to anyone who had any inkling of it's like, oh no, they're out for the greater good. It's like, no, everyone cares about themselves and their own, and that's just life at that point, right? Everyone cares about their community, and it's nice to prove the point once in a while that regardless of their political opinion, at the end of the day, they just really care about themselves.
Yeah, and
because they're always on the biggest soapbox about it, right? About helping others, and it's all just a front to destabilize the communities of which they disagree with their politics, right? That's all it really is. It's let's send people to destabilize the social fabric of the communities that are opposed to us in order to effectively increase our control in those areas.
Well, and it also gives you an opportunity to showcase, like, if and remember, the governor of Massachusetts is a Republican. If this GOP governor can activate the National Guard to remove illegal aliens, why can't
what a great precedent?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why can't all of the GOP governors do that? Why aren't they all doing it right now? Like let's stop, forget the small ball. Why isn't Ron DeSantis, moving, people like, okay, we're mobilizing the National Guard. If you can use the National Guard to remove people from Martha's Vineyard, then why can't you use them? Are those people residents of Florida or Texas because that's where they illegally entered? Like, that's not how it works. Like, those people aren't now magically stuck in the state they walked into, right? I mean, this is a great thing with migration, right? Like, progressives love to argue with, like during the Arab Spring and all these, Arab migrants coming in, they didn't have to stop in the first country that they ran into. They were allowed to go like all the way to Sweden, right? But apparently when illegal immigrants come to America, they must stop in the first state that they get to, and they can they just have to be stuck there for the rest of their lives. Like, only that state can deal with that problem. Like, it's just it just shows that there should be options. Like, if we can mobilize the National Guard to do this, why aren't they? And those are serious questions that need to be answered by like every GOP governor at this point.
Which, yeah, this seems like low-hanging fruit, right?
Right.
It seems like an easy win for them. So I hear what you're saying. I think it really does segue into that open letter and this really I think it's a relatively new concept of best practice. I use that in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Of what is the unspoken is now becoming the spoken as far as how things are run, and it's being laid out in so many words. Let's go right into it. So for those of you who don't know, this is an open letter from, I believe it's 8 former secretaries of defense, and along with some of the former joint chiefs of staff. Let's see here. How many? Oh, no, that's a separate article.
Yeah, you've got Gates, you've got Mattis.
Yeah.
I think it's like 9 secretaries and like 5 or 6 former joint chiefs.
5, 6. So yeah, so one, two, three, four, five former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and 8 secretaries of defense have all signed off on this open letter. And I'll say the beginning of the letter is mostly fluff. It's reiterating the obligations of military officers to the Constitution and to the government and to the president. But the bullet points, it specifically talks about O4s and above, meaning those would be field grade officers, so for those of us playing at home, majors and above, or lieutenant commanders and above. So we're really talking about the middle management and above of the military service, right? These are the middle managers of on a large scale of the military. So your general officers and your field grade officers. And it's the later bullet points that get more interesting, and I'm going to read off some of it just verbatim. So it's let's start with number 12 here. I apologize. Let's start with number 11 here. Military officials are required to carry out legal orders, the wisdom of which they doubt. Civilian officials should provide the military ample opportunity to express their doubts in appropriate venues. Civilians and military officials should also take care to properly characterize military advice in public. Civilian leaders must take responsibility for the consequences of the actions they direct. That's kind of a given, but it's strange that they would choose to reiterate that. And it's starting to build a bit of a theme here. I'm going to read a little bit more before I start to analyze it a little bit. The military reinforces effective civilian control when it seeks clarification, raises questions about second and third order effects, and which I would highlight, and proposes alternatives that may not have been considered. There's this issue of mutual trust in Part 13. Trust upward that civilian leaders will rigorously explore alternatives that are best for the country, regardless of the implications of partisan politics. And trust downward that the military will faithfully implement directives that run counter to their professional military preference. This helps overcome friction in building the civil-military relationship. Number 14, the military, active duty, reserve, and National Guard have carefully delimited roles when it comes to law enforcement. These roles must be taken only insofar as that they're consistent with the Constitution and relevant statutes. The military has an obligation to advise on the wisdom of proposed actions, and civilians should create the opportunity for such deliberation. So we could stop there for right now. There's a little more I want to discuss, but it's the concept of deliberation. It's the concept of like when you will or when you not carry out civilian orders. So basically, there's really only one. Let's say there's only like 2 civilians, right, that they're really talking about. You could argue the Secretary of Defense or the secretary heads of each department, so like Secretary of Army, Navy, Air Force, and then the president. But they're really just talking about the president in this case. And there's this very odd thing. Why are they reiterating like questioning or not questioning the orders of civilian leaders when it comes to military operations? And I'm sure this always does happen behind closed doors, right? Presidents are going to ask for the advice of their military leaders and how to handle military operations. But ultimately, the president has the choice to carry out whatever he wants, right? If I'm in charge as a leader, I can ask for the opinions and the recommendations and the expert recommendations of my general staff or of my staff. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, and how things are going to be done are ultimately my decision. So it's putting in this let's call it a very strange legal safety valve, right? Where the military leaders are given in this letter, in essence, a legal safety valve to disobey civilian leadership when they believe it's against best practices, or when they have time to rigorously explore alternatives. I know it says here, trust upward civilian leaders will rigorously explore alternatives. regardless of partisan politics. But it's just the whole wording of this is very much in like, hey, listen, yes, these people are in charge, but if you have time to question it, which if for those who have served in the military, there's often not a lot of time to question orders, right? That's the whole point of the situation. They're usually, if you're being given, important orders in a kinetic situation where they, there could be some sort of violent action. There's not a whole lot of time to reinterpret those orders often. So this is like basically giving them an out in that, like, well, you know what, you can kind of question what's going on here, and then we can back it up and check it out legally later. And it's a very odd precedent to set when it comes to military orders. So I was a bit long-winded. So I'm going to have you, Auron, like ask your questions. And there's a little more I'd like to get into in this, some of the other paragraphs. But that's kind of me reading between the lines of this documentation, right? I know it doesn't say that exactly, but just based upon my years of experience, it's an odd thing to have to reiterate. And the fact that they are, I'm doing my best to read between the lines on this one. And this is what I'm hearing out of this article. So maybe, I know you've read it as well, and your perspective, maybe you have a different opinion on it, but this is really what I'm seeing.
Yeah, when you first sent it to me, I did not jump out quite the way that I had it had to you. But then when you walk me through a lot of it, because the one thing I did notice, and the thing that you mentioned a couple times there, was the number of times that they use best practices. We only read a couple of these, but we see best practices throughout here. And this is something that I've noticed in general, not just with the military, but best practices is of course a phrase that has worked itself. It's already existed in kind of the medical realm and kind of the corporate realm, and it's getting pushed down into pretty much everything. And it's kind of this entrusting the bureaucracy with established procedures, kind of weasel word, right? Like, as long as this has been determined as a best practice, and we can't really trace down to like who created a best practice or when it became best practice, but it very much is in the realm of like, well, basically at some point it was determined that this is how it's done, and we now have to do it that way, kind of in perpetuity. But what it really does is it allows for a lot of interpretation within the bureaucracy of like what a best practice is. And so that jumped out at me at the number of times that they're using that, because that doesn't feel like a military term, right? That feels like a very bureaucratic.
Correct. And it's not one you would see, not that our U.S. military is particularly big on following standard operating procedure or following their field manuals or whatnot, because every unit kind of pretty much wings it when it comes to actually how they operate, which is by design. When dealing with the U.S. military, every foreign threat or every foreign government or foreign military has to deal with an entirely new unit every unit they engage, right? One platoon or one company is going to operate differently than another platoon, company, or battalion or brigade. And so it's a real pain in the ass to fight the U.S. military as a result. But what we've done here is they've reiterated some very basic concepts of how the military is supposed to function, but then couched it in this very, very vague, very gray, very bureaucratic best practices, which is new. And the only conclusion I can come to this, based upon all everything I've read in this relatively short letter, is that it's giving for specifically field grade and general grade officers the opportunity to question civilian leadership when it's against whatever best practices are. And I use that in quotes again. So all I can interpret from best practices is however the wind is blowing in Washington. Like that's really all I can tell. It's like whatever the bureaucracy is comfortable with, that's best practice. And if a civilian leader, and let's not dance around it, Trump or DeSantis or some other Republican leader does something and chooses use the military in such a way that is we'd be considered unpopular or against, not unpopular, but against the best practices as established by the DC bureaucracy, the government bureaucracy. This gives them legal cover, right? This gives those military leader legal cover to basically disregard orders, which has already been done, right? This is the precedent has already been set with Trump while he was president. Many of his direct orders were just basically ignored. Now, fine, maybe you can say you can argue that some of his orders were probably best ignored for whatever reason. That's not really the point. When you are actively working against the president or basically ignoring direct orders from the president, you put yourself in a kind of a legal pickle, right? Because if the president is ordering you to do something and then you say no, he's well within his rights to not only relieve you from duty, but in essence you could be tried and you'd have a courts martial if they so choose, have a courts martial, and then a direct disobeyment of orders, and they could get kicked out of the military. But what this whole article is doing is basically saying, listen, the legal experts will protect you from the direct orders of the president, and the military experts will really help decide what the best practices are. So, follow the president's orders, but if it's saying anything that's against best practices, listen, just kind of ignore him. And then, we'll get it in some sort of legal loophole later on, and it'll be fine. That sets a pretty crazy precedent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like you said, there are multiple direct examples of this with Trump, right? Like, we know specifically that we had generals bragging about the fact that they ignored Trump's order to reduce forces in, I believe, Afghanistan, right?
Correct.
They openly talked about, like, yeah, we just didn't do it, and
right.
That is, of course, terrifying if you actually think that that's that this is how the country is supposed to run. And we also know that we had people like Milley say specifically, like, I was battling the president, right? Like, he specifically said, like, I was basically fighting the president from inside. He's the resistance from inside the military. And that's
right.
a really that's a really concerning thing, because, of course, if the commander in chief is not in charge of the military, then who is in charge of the military?
Who is in charge of the military?
Right.
It's
the, and it sounds like it's the best
in charge
practices.
Of the military.
Right.
Right. It's again, we go back to you're exactly right. It's no longer the president that's actually in charge of the military, but instead it's that group of experts. In this case, the group of experts would be those generals and admirals, or the secretaries of defense, or the again, it would just be the Washington leadership. And but again, it goes back to that not having any accountability, right? Oh, it wasn't any one individual who made a decision. It was these group of generals, and it wasn't a great decision at the end of the day, but it really wasn't any one of us. So, rather than call one person out, we're just going to mutually accept the blame, which is another way of just saying nobody accepts the blame. Correct. And I would actually like to point out one little portion of the beginning of this article that proves that argument that I just had. But at the very beginning, at the very beginning of the article, we are in an exceptionally challenging civil-military environment. Many of the factors that shape civil-military relations have undergone extreme strains in recent years. Translation: the president and the military haven't gotten along recently. Geopolitically, the winding down of the wars in Afghanistan and the ramping up of great power conflicts mean the U.S. military must simultaneously come to terms with wars that ended without all the goals satisfactorily accomplished. That is the most whitewashed response to we lost in Afghanistan that I've ever seen. And again, that goes back to not assigning blame to anybody, right? None of these generals were held accountable for their failures. They were promoted up and out, right? They failed in Afghanistan, and they became directors of the CIA, or they became Washington lobbyists, or they became secretaries of defense. Like, it's crazy to think about. If you imagine in earlier times, if you failed in such a way, where you were the general in charge of a campaign and you completely screwed it up, you'd be thrown off the Tarpeian Rock, or you would fall on your sword in shame. But these days, there's no there's every risk for not falling in line and being part of the group, right? If you step away and take risks and you're not successful, you'll be cut down right away and you'll be cast aside. But if you stay with the crowd, make no decisions that aren't as a result of group consensus, even if you fail, you'll never be accountable for your actions. And why would you risk a 30-year career in the military by trying to do something against best practices at that point? You would just shut up and fall in line, collect your paycheck, and not do anything, which kind of circles back to our discussion last week, where we were, talking about how the words that were coming out of the president's mouth, mostly about, threatening to use military force against, civilians quite casually. It's like, oh, well, if anyone were to challenge us here in the United States, we'd drop bombs from F-15s on them. But now now you can kind of see, not you, but like people can kind of see why nobody speaks out against it. If you speak out against it, you're cast aside. But if you remain silent, you personally will be okay, regardless of the how well the country is going to survive. Right, you and your mansion in Martha's Vineyard is going to be fine, regardless of the fact the country is burning down around you. And I think that's really what it's come to, is it's just easier for them to go with the inertia of how things are run than it is to stand up and regardless of their level of agreement with the orders that are issued to them, it's better just to remain silent and kind of just ignore them. And this letter is setting that precedent, not in law, but in best practice, which is in essence the new law that can be changed at any time.
Yeah, I want to hit on that because I think the thing that we're seeing here is something we're observing across our society, right? Which is that all of our institutions are following this model of like obfuscated oligarchy, right? Like they're spreading there are no decisions are never made by humans anymore. They're always made by committee. They're made by policy. They're made by best practices. This is a pattern we're seeing in business. It's a pattern we're seeing in the military. It's a pattern we're seeing in everything right now. And so in many ways, this is just the army following the pattern that our society has taken, the path that our society has taken, where we're kind of just ruled by this egregore, right? Like this collective unconsciousness of like policy that no one knows where it came from, and no one could point to who actually implemented it, and no one can be held accountable. And so no one wants to take charge because like you said, then you're the nail that's sticking up. You're going to get hammered down. Best to just keep your head down and go with the best practices, even though no one seems to know what the best practices are, or where they came from, or why they were implemented. And no one can be held accountable when they failed because they were just following the best practices. And as long as you follow the best practices, you can't really be held accountable for what you did because, well, everyone's following the best practices. But at the same time, this is the most terrifying thing in the military, right? Because the military is like the exact opposite of this. This is the exact opposite of what you want. In a time where you have conflict, where you have like you're saying, like kinetic action, when you have real crisis, you want decisive leadership, people who take charge. The buck stops with them. That is how organizations like this are run. And that's how you know how sick our society is, when kind of the poisonous, like managerial bureaucratic obfuscation that has like corroded every other institution in our society has gotten to the military, because that's an institution that just it cries out against it, right? Like it's the very essence of it is very monarchical. It is very, one person's in charge, they make the decisive action, and if they're wrong, they pay the consequences. That is the structure of the military, and
It
instead
has to be
it has to be to function, but we're
to function.
sacrificing that for best practices.
Correct. And that's the most concerning. And other organizations can get away with this groupthink, but when you do it in the military, and whatever decision the committee comes to is not successful, because the middle way is often no way at all when it comes to a military problem, you've calcified the military leadership into inaction, because that's the safest choice.
Yeah.
And you cannot do that with an organization that has the global responsibilities that the U.S. military does, regardless of if you believe they should hold those responsibilities, because it's going to fail. And it is currently failing. So this reinforcement, especially with its emphasis on the civil military environment, i.e. translation of how the military is used within the United States, you're basically opening the floor to the military not doing anything, or the military being utilized in whatever way is determined to be best practice by whoever might be in charge. Okay, so this is the progressives' attempt to control the military and keep this hard power away from away from Republican leadership or conservative leadership, right? Specifically Trump or possibly DeSantis. But when you've set that precedent, what happens when the wind blows the other way? What happens when best practice changes to something that these people disagree with? Or what happens when some general gets the bright idea to realize that all of his peers are calcified by their ability to not make a decision, and all it takes is a few dynamic leaders to basically take control, regardless of what rank they hold. Right? If you sit around and your generals and your majors and your colonels are just, basically holding their hands up in the air, it's like, it's not my decision, it's not my decision. What happens when you have somebody who says, well, I'm going to make these decisions, and I'm going to, I'm going to follow my own orders at this point, because you're not giving me anything and you're not telling me what to do. You're basically putting your hands up and shrugging. Well, cool. I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring and decide to do things the way I want to do them. And what are you going to do about it? Because you can't make a decision to save your life. So it's bad precedent all around that this article is reinforcing.
Yeah, I think your point about the decisive action is very important too, because like you said, you have all these people terrified to move, and that's what these, this is what the oligarchy wants, right? Like they feel safest when there is no option for decisive action, right? Like you said, they want to keep the hard power away. And so you want to have everyone who might have access to the hard power to be like as weak and indecisive as possible. That's not a failure in their eyes. That's a feature, right? It's not a bug, it's a feature. They want military leaders like this. And this is always the tension, right? When you have these very weak leaders, you have these fox type leaders who are all about being crafty, and they don't know anything about decisive leadership, and they don't know anything about taking control, and they're all about obfuscation and hiding the ball, because they feel safe, because they feel like, well, America is invincible and they can never lose any of its prestige, and they can never, lose a war or anything, despite the obvious evidence to the contrary. When you think that way, you have no problem weakening your military as much as you like, because the military is really, at the end of the day, the only threat to your power, right? That's how they really see it, is the military needs to be kept as weak as possible, so that there's never anyone who could rise up, or there's never an option for someone to come in and use any of that against them. And so they want this kind of thing to be weak because they're terrified of its power. But of course,
It's
You
the
know that,
final bastion of hard power, right? That can't
yes,
be taken away completely. It has to be hard power.
but any sane person knows like America needs hard power. Like every nation needs hard power. You have to have a military force that can actually like defeat people in war. And
Correct.
so like anyone who cares about the country, anyone who has like their head on straight, anyone who's sane knows that like actually this is a terrible thing to like eat your army alive from the inside, eat your armed forces alive from the inside just so you can feel more secure in your power. But of course they don't understand that. They're invincible, right? They're invincible elites. They can't imagine a world in which they don't rule. They can't imagine a world in which, you know, that they don't hold this hegemony across the globe. And so there's no cost at the end of the day for weakening the military and making them subject to best practices that can be manipulated by the oligarchy behind the scenes or throughout the bureaucracy. Because at the end of the day, there's just, you'll never actually need these people unless you just want to turn them on the chuds, right? Like unless you need to use them to quiet the, you know, the MAGA guys in the hinterlands or something. That's the only use they can now seem to imagine for the United States military. And terrifyingly, people like the president of the United States are kind of more than willing to say that on a regular basis now.
Yes, the president of the United States and his staff are more than willing to make offhanded jokes about turning the United States military against the United States people, the people of the United States, which is terrifying in its own right. But you know, regardless of the United States, in order to have a country such as ours, which is a superpower, remain effective on the world stage, you cannot turn the military into this groupthink bureaucracy where nothing happens. You can do it with, I mean, you can do it in the medical field, right? To the detriment of patients, and lots of people will die as a result. You can do it in the education field to the detriment of education in general. And we're basically teaching remedial English at the university level. But when you start to do it to the military, it's again, it's that third rail I thought nobody would be stupid enough to touch, but they see no issue in touching it. So I don't have an answer other than this is couching the concept of best practice in verbiage for the military. That's what this open letter is, and that's what's so concerning about it. It seems relatively benign on its surface, but it really isn't. I think it's a bit of a, it's setting, it's not law, but it is law in a way, right? It's the law of best practice, and that's what they're setting in words.
Well, and Sam Francis talks about in Leviathan His Enemies how this law of procedure is what replaces, you know, your more traditional law, right? As you have these managerial elites come to power, the law of best practices functionally becomes the law, because if you don't follow best practices, then you are subject to the law. But if you do follow best practices, then basically
You're
you can't
not.
be held accountable because you followed the best practices set out before you. And so the initiative is taking away, and everyone is incentivized to only follow those practices. And so I think this is just kind of a thing again that was predicted in the system that's kind of coming to pass, and coming to pass in the most terrifying organization imaginable, because again, like, it's just so such an anathema to what the military is supposed to be, that when you see it appear there, it starts to get very, very terrifying. But
Agreed.
speaking of things that you're terrified to see in the military, of course, the military has an equity chief, because that's how we do things now. So we have the Department of Defense equity chief, and you know, the Kalissa wing, I guess is, yeah. I'm sure I'm
Why
pronouncing it
not?
incorrectly. Sure,
Sure.
right. But one of the interesting things, of course, about her is that she tweets many things, or has tweeted many things, because if you go out and get yourself a diversity chief, of course she's going to complain about white people. So she had some quotes here. I'm exhausted with these folks in these professional development sessions. Uh, Wing overseas curriculum there, and then we have uh, this lady actually had the caudacity. See what she did there? Very clever. The caudacity to say that black people can be racist too. I have to stop the session and give Karen the business. We are not the majority. We don't have power. Uh, the New York Post explains this for us what caudacity means there, of course. And then we have being anti-racist means being against racism. You will never arrive. Stop centering this on whiteness. Just a lot, pretty much exactly what you'd expect, right? And that's the thing, is when you hire someone to be a chief equity or equity chief.
I mean, let's call it for what it is, or on a political commissar.
Right. Yes. Yeah, you have a political commissar, and the thing is, like, everyone's like, I can't believe they said it about this one side. It's like, well, what did you think equity meant here? Right? Like, did you think equity meant like she was going to look at every racial group? No, like she will be looking at one, and she will be insulting and attacking one group. That's what equity means. When you hire an equity chief, that's what you're looking for. The staffing of this position with Kalisa Wing is not an accident. This is exactly the type of person with the exact qualifications you want in that position.
Of course. And again, if you step out of line, if you say the wrong thing, if you think the wrong thoughts, well, then that's just against best practice, and all the more reason to root you out from the military, and and ensure that you can never work again. And somebody like this thinks it's funny.
Yeah, and right? Again,
go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, and this is one of those tests, right? Like, this is nonsense as a uniform. If you won't go along this, if you won't let someone insult you based on your race, if you won't let someone guide the policy of the United States military with this kind of ideology, then you're going to be forced out, right? You're not following best practices. And so this Correct. Is a screening mechanism for, like you said, political commissar. This is a screening mechanism for political loyalty. Are you willing to parrot back this open bigotry towards white people? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to take orders from this kind of person? Are you letting this person set your policy? If not, then you don't belong in the military, right? You need to get
and that's exactly it. Like, if you can't at the very least keep your mouth shut and allow whatever she wants to do to happen, then you are a political liability regardless of your effectiveness as a military leader, and so therefore should be removed or marginalized, which is a great idea, right? Let's marginalize all of our effective leadership. Let's calcify the decision-making process, and let's get rid of anybody who would have any sort of concept of what a battlefield or like tactical or operational ability is, right? Has no ability to understand, how strategic, operational, and tactical operations are to take place within the military, and let's replace them with politically palatable people. Ideally, people who are minorities, and let's do our best to just make sure that all of those white officers and NCOs are eventually just sidelined because they could be some sort of political threat. What a just a great idea of how to run our military. Like, seriously, it's such a great concept, and it's going to never blow up in their face.
Well, and speaking of things that don't have a historical record of just completely destroying your country and sending it over the edge of the abyss, the Pentagon tells struggling army soldiers and families to apply for food stamps. The Pentagon
let them eat cake.
Yeah, or whatever mystery meat they can afford on food stamps.
Right, exactly.
The Pentagon is recommending U.S. soldiers struggling with soaring food prices apply for welfare. Now, Ostrakon, we're not, neither of us are historians, but we like to think of ourselves maybe as students of history.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
How does not paying your military go? What's the record with that?
Yeah, not great. Like, in historical terms, usually if you're, if you're going to have one organization in your government that you make sure is, taken care of financially, it's usually your military, right? The people who hold your hard power for you, you should not dismiss so easily. And just put them on food stamps. There's a program for that. Maybe, and this is not the first time this has happened. under, President George Bush, there was a similar situation where soldiers were below the poverty line, and he did put in legislation to overall increase soldier pay or military pay in order to bring them above the poverty line. So this would not be a requirement. Obviously, they're not going to bother with that. They're just that's their answer, is to just, have these soldiers apply for, food stamps, and, sit in line with the rest of the civilians. I mean, I guess you obviously, these people in charge obviously think they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof.
Yeah.
And none of the actions that they're currently having or taking, none of these actions are going to have any repercussions for them. It just feels like, I don't know, recently, and maybe it's just things come in threes or whatnot. It just seems like they've specifically been, let's call it, pecking at the military structure more recently than they have in the past. And I don't know why that is. Maybe they already feel secure in managing all the other aspects of government, and military is that final column of which they feel they need to have more control over. But it just seems like they're focusing on it more recently, and isn't the past 6 months recently. And again, I would think there would be, some general or admiral out there who would just say, you can't do this. This is insane. We're no longer going to have a functional country. But then that person would get removed and marginalized or fired.
They're not following best practices.
They're not following best practices. So I think, though, the only real answer at this point is if the United States military fails to do their duty in a really extreme way. I don't even have an answer for that, though, because our failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, if that's not going to be enough of a wake-up call for that our military leadership needs to be changed, then I don't have an answer other than it completely blowing up in a catastrophic way, which it will. And I think a lot than a lot of people in these positions of power think it will, right? There's the inertia of how it functions can only go on for so long till you've gutted it to the point where it's no longer functional. There are hard limits of which I believe they're fast approaching on having a functional military.
And it's terrifying, the number of things in our society that are approaching that limit, right? We know supply chains, we're not getting fertilizer anymore. Like people are predicting food shortages, major publications and stuff, and just no one's really doing anything about that, right? There's no real action being taken. We're busy running the January 6th Commission, or arguing over where to deposit illegal immigrants that we just let come in by the tens and hundreds of thousands. It feels like everything in kind of the empire is pushing at this. You can feel it almost leaning under the weight, of just every one of the support structures is just barely holding on. And it is weird at a time where you would think at the very least, if you're going to push this hard, right? If you're the ruling class and you're going to push this hard, do you think the one thing you would kind of want locked down
in your back
and
pocket,
competent,
right?
would be the military, right?
No. Nope, not even that. They will tear down every logistical structure of the United States and reshape it in their image, at the expense of effectiveness, right? Political loyalty above all, above effectiveness, above functionality, above basic competence. It does not matter if you are competent at your job. It only matters if you are loyal to the state.
Yeah, you can really feel.
That's how it feels. No, go ahead.
Yeah, you can really feel like that. It's weird because it's in some ways all they can think about is the maintenance of the power at this point. Nothing else needs to function, because the only thing you can't govern if you're not in charge, right? And so the only thing matters is being in charge. And it really doesn't matter if you eat every single bit of like what's left of kind of the structure and function and fabric of the United States, as long as you can just stay in power, that's all that matters. And so like you'll be king of the ashes, but you'll still be king, right? And it really does feel like that's the focus at this point. But that's all of our articles. We do have a number of super chats stacking up
Yeah, we
here.
can get to them.
Let's go ahead and start running down here. Narco Republican for $5. Thank you very much. Not in my backyard has evolved into not in my vineyard. That's right. Absolutely.
Yes, it has.
Yep. All right, Andrew F for $20. Thank you very much. Very generous of you. Who's going to trust that these decisions are free of partisan politics after Biden made his MAGA extreme speech? This sounds like it's trying to sell a form of decision neutrality that doesn't exist. Yeah, absolutely.
It is. That's exactly
right.
what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
There is no neutrality in any of these decisions. They are couching their opinions on how things should be run under the guise of best practices. And the fact that they use a constitution as a shield in that particular article on like reminding, military officers of their obligation to the Constitution. What is it you've said many times? Progressives will hollow out your
they'll hollow your religion and wear skin like a trophy.
Correct. And in this case, they'll hollow out the Constitution and wear its skin like a trophy.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean it is like you said, it's been so clear, like Drew said in the super chat, that there is extreme partisanship, that basically one party in the United States has been more or less declared the enemy by the sitting president while being flanked by the military with a blood red background. Like, you really can't be more clear about the lack of political neutrality in the institutions of the United States than that. Not that it ever existed, but the illusion should kind of be dust. And it does feel, like you said, like this kind of rearguard attempt to kind of recapture that. But you wonder who's buying that at this point. The only people who are buying it are people who benefit from it. Like anyone else,
of course,
on the outside sees this, I think.
And the part that I never know, the part that always. And you've told me many times at this point, but the part that I never really seen, maybe it's just me not wanting to believe, is why they have to push for this in every avenue. Yeah. There are no organizations they're willing to leave alone and allow to function, right? To include the military in this point, where it's just accepted that this organization is not going to have the same politics as us. And that's okay because of its necessary function. That is not tolerable.
When you have built your entire political machine at this point on Leninism, like purely on giving people status and power based on their political affiliation, you can't really leave any institution left unmolested, because if you do, that institution could gather power and move against you, right? Like you have to convert everything, especially the military, particularly military, for the reasons we've said many times. So.
Yep. I mean, but you can convert the organizations, but you can't convert every individual, right? You can
but you can freeze the individual, right? That's what we've been talking about with best practices, right?
You can freeze the individual to the point, but then when the quality of life is so low that it doesn't matter and people don't care anymore, then what was the point, right? If you're not going to provide a decent quality of life for the American people, they've got no what's the word I'm looking for? You're taking off all the offerings. If you're going to make them, docile, but you're not going to have them fat and happy and leave them alone, then you're asking for problems at that point, right? If you have like the logistics system, right, by making it incompetent in favor of political loyalty, right? People don't give a shit about politics anymore when there's no food on the table. Or they care, or rather, they care very much about politics when there is no food on the table.
They care about real politics and not the BS politics.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this gives me a chance to shill my new piece. I just got a piece on the American mind, and it actually addresses some of what you're talking about, Ostrakon. It's about the elites and why our current set of elites do not have access to the types of solutions you're talking about. And the
Right.
reason is that the political formula of the managerial elite is this formula of like homogenizing everything, like handing everything to managers, making sure that there's no direct authority, that everything is built into bureaucracy, and using that to like generate efficiency because you like standardized everything. Like the need to homogenize and so that everything can be properly managed and every bit of efficiency can be kind of eked out is the formula. But we've reached the edge of that political formula. Like we've run to the edges of the ability of those solutions to solve problems, but they can't offer different solutions, because if they did, that would shatter their political formula. And because no one's allowed to be in charge in their structure, like there's no one to take control and make the bold decisive decisions you're talking about. So there is no opportunity, like even if it's obvious it needs to get done, they can't do it because that will literally shatter the structure with which they hold power in the United States. And so there might be solutions, but they cannot pursue them by the very definition of the system they've created and the power structure that they inhabit.
Because it would be an admission that their power structure has faults.
Exactly. And that would mean people would look elsewhere. And that means that their whole facade falls apart because it's all being held together with this illusion that like this will produce the best outcome. And if it becomes very clear that this has no power to provide like the material abundance and things that it has in the past, then the entire justification for their power falls apart.
I mean, and I think it'll only be obvious to everybody when it comes to things like, when there is no more food or when the lights switch off. I think that's really what it'll come to. When there's rolling blackouts, when food deliveries are late, when people start starving, that's when it will galvanize people into caring about this.
Yep. It turns out every regime is three meals away, right?
Yes.
Um, all right, so Ronald Fisher here says $20. Again, thank you very much, very generous. Says, well, what we were just talking about. So great job here, Ronald. Someone must decide. Carl Schmitt's theory of of sovereignty is true, and parliamentary democracy and constitutions are fake and unrealistic. And yeah, even Schmitt's point was even in a parliamentary constitution, the best thing the Constitution can do is give you the procedure who will then decide on the exception, like who will take power to then make those decisions. And Schmitt is echoing de Maistre here. A lot of people may not know, if you're not familiar with the connective tissue, but sorry, I'm going to nerd out here for a second. If you're not familiar with the connective tissue between Schmitt and de Maistre, Schmitt is reiterating a point de Maistre makes, which is that the value of someone who can decide is actually quite high, and we kind of like take that for granted. Like we don't think that's a very big deal, but anyone who's been in a very difficult situation, guys like Ostrakon, know that like decisive leadership is a rare thing, right? It's not a common thing.
It is.
It's very valuable. And so
anecdotally, just real quick, I just want to say, I had many of my soldiers, complain or moan about the decisions I made. But when the chips were down and they were looking for somebody to make a decision, or they needed help in their personal lives, they ran straight to me. They will always, people will always complain and what's the word I'm looking for? Second guess the decisions you make as a leader. But what I have found is at the end of the day, when a decision needs to be made, these people will come to you asking for that decision to be made for them.
This is one of the most basic things of just like parents, right? Like
Correct.
everyone complains about strict parents, but by the time you hit 25, you're glad you had parents that cared about you and like were able to protect you from certain things, as opposed to the kids whose parents couldn't be bothered or were too weak to do it, right? Like,
and I actually asked you about this many years ago, and I was like, Auron, I don't get it. Like these people don't want to spend time with me or hang out with me, as they don't have to, right? These are not my friends, and they don't think much of me. And yet just the other day, they came rushing to me to ask for how something needs to be done or asking for, my advice. And you said to me, he's like, yeah, it's because you're dad. Like why don't you get this? Is like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. And that you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's just like you'll never be one of them, and that's okay. Like you're not
You're not
supposed to
supposed to
be.
be. Yeah, if
You're
you were
supposed
one
to
of
be
them, you
separate.
couldn't do your job. Like
Exactly.
that's the thing about elites when we talk about elites, that people, people get really worked up about it, and I get it, I understand. But like, one of the things that sets people apart is that they are set apart and that they can handle that, right? And you don't need to be everybody's friend when you're in those positions of authority. And so someone like Schmidt talks about, who can make those decisions, who can act decisively, they need to be able to do that despite the chatter around them, despite the approval about them. They don't need best practices. They do what's
Correct.
necessary, right? And that's what you want when you have hard times.
It's like, why? Because I said so, and I think it's the best choice.
Absolutely. All right. Sundin 564 looks like, I believe that's Canadian dollars. Thank you very much. BoomerCon, we need to get back to the Constitution. Samwise Gamgee. I don't think there will be a return journey, Mr. Frodo. Yeah, I mean, I've obviously talked about this a lot. Actually, it's very interesting. I was on Jesse Kelly's show a couple days ago, and he actually wanted to talk about this, much to Jesse Kelly's credit, because he's very much more of a mainstream kind of talk radio guy. But he was making this point too, one that I've made very often, one that you're making here, Sundin, that the Constitution is not enough, and sitting there and pretending like it's going to be the thing that kind of saves you, that the thing that so many traditional conservatives have kind of counted on, this deification of the Constitution. He was agreeing with me, saying, this is not something that we can rely on. We have to understand that this document in and of itself is not going to get this job done. So I think you're right, and I'm hoping. I think more and more people are waking up to that. I'm talking to more people in mainstream audiences about that, and so I hope that's something that gets a little better understood. It's a difficult thing to grasp. It's something that's very hard to me. This is literally kind of my first big step with the COVID thing, of watching kind of all the remaining illusions I had about constitutional protections fall apart. That was a big kind of red pill moment, or whatever you want to call it, for me, and I think it might be for many others. Let's see. Maximum Weeb for $20. Thank you very much, sir. I sincerely think, hope, pray for better than 50% chance that Trump still controls a sizable patriot military faction, laying groundwork for get-go military tribunals. Any other terror could lead to disastrous civil war. I mean, we're all hoping that the military will follow the orders of someone like Trump if he should be elected. But I think
Don't count on
specifically,
it.
that's why we read this open letter today, right?
That's the whole point of us reading this.
Right, is that it feels like they are laying the groundwork to say, well, what if these aren't legal? What if we can take those orders to court? And we didn't get into that. We meant to, but what if we can get those orders into court and have them overruled? Maybe we can hold off on following orders, and later on the bureaucracy will protect us when we kind of take it into court and these kind of things, into deeper into kind of the bureaucracy. And so while you do hope that's what they're going to do, Maxim Weeb, I think that the whole reason we read this letter is that Ostrakon kind of saw that they were saying the opposite.
That's exactly the purpose of this letter, is giving them a best practice outlet to not follow the orders of the president.
Darth Kilhoun for $5. I think you've talked about your service before, Calhoun. Having spent 3 years in the Army, all the officers that are like Patton are capped at Lieutenant Colonel. This would be based if the generals were Pattons.
Well, they marginalized him too. I'm talking about Patton. Like, the press hated Patton. He was everything they didn't want. The U.S. Government during World War II had built this image of U.S. generals being these, football captains and like college educated middle class guys who were very much this can do sort of come from humble backgrounds to lead the American soldier in combat. And Patton was very much an aristocrat, came from old money, and had a very strong opinions, obviously, about how political leadership should be conducted in a military setting. And I there's some people believe, obviously that he was assassinated, but I don't really believe that. But what I do believe is that when he died, nobody was sad. Like everyone was kind of relieved because he was such an outspoken disagreement with military civilian policy immediately post World War II. Although, looking back on it historically, he was absolutely right, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Like General Patton was 100% correct in his assessment of how things ended up. But it wasn't a popular opinion.
But that was the problem, right?
That's the problem, right? And so therefore he was marginalized.
Yeah. Drew F. again for $20. Thank you very much. They can play this in the middle of a crisis, such as an election dispute. Best practices says we don't intervene, or best practices is let the FBI handle this, which goes back to the manipulating procedure outcomes. Yes, Drew, but that's exactly right. Right. The strength of the regime is the ability to manipulate procedural outcomes. The more they can place the actions of the military into this gray area of best practices, and they can redefine and manipulate best practices on the fly, then whoever gets elected, it changes what the best practices were, right? And so you can change that.
Yeah, congratulations, Drew. You've received an A for credit for this particular podcast.
That's right. Gold stars for Drew all the way across.
Gold star. Yeah, this is exactly what we were saying. Well done.
All right, we've got Frigiv Roosevelt. I'm sure I said that wrong.
Go ahead.
For $20. What are your thoughts on the military recruiting crisis? How will they attempt to overcome this? They're openly attacking the group. That is the tip of the spear. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that problem, right? And there's the most ridiculous thing when they were having the college loan payoff debate. There was some random Republican state rep who was like, "You can't pay off college loans because then no one will join the military."
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, that was brutal, but it is a real issue, right? Like they are having a very serious time military recruiting. Of course, they're lowering standards and all that stuff. We always talk about that, but there is a real crisis, I think, with their ability to replenish that, and especially like they said, you are basically gutting a demographic and a political group that were the core, especially of your kind of high functioning units, and you're more or less purging them from the military. We've talked about this 1,000 times, so we won't beat it to death, but at some point the effectiveness just falls apart, right? They can't even use these forces to do basic police actions like we talked about. Let's see here. Find the next one. All right, Matty Ice for $10. Asked by a former Intel first sergeant why they're doing the stuff like this. He simply said, "I don't know," and said it was concerning. Chilled me to the bone. Happy to see American Ostrakon. Have a good weekend, lads. Thank you very much, Matty.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's also terrifying to me. That's the whole point of me talking about it.
Well, like I've said on multiple You
Go
are
ahead.
someone who has a lot of friendships and a lot of professional connections with active military. What do active military think of this? Like, not the guys who are completely like plugged in, but I mean, is there a lot of rumbling about this, or what's going on?
There's no rumbling. It's everyone is doing their best to make it to retirement. Like that's all they talk about. All they're talking about is like, listen, I've only got 3 more years left. I can get to my retirement. I can put in for my VA benefits. And then I can, I don't know, like, I don't know if hide is the right word, but basically just be left alone. Like that's their only solution is like, I'm ignoring everything that's going on in the military because I'm about to get out. That's their solution.
And it's weird. I mean, it's not weird. It's entirely predictable and terrifying. How, again, that echoes across so many aspects. I don't know anyone in law enforcement who isn't desperately trying to get out. Yep. I don't know any of them. Everyone I know,
like everyone who is in like friends and whatnot, who are in
all my friends who are in law enforcement, everyone I know who has a career in law enforcement is just, they're trying to get out as fast as possible. What's my quickest exit? How do I collect a pension and get out of here with my head, kind of just as low as possible? Every part of your society that's like really essential for security forces and functioning in that realm is just trying to get through the door as fast as they can. which is not a great sign.
No, I mean, I get it. Like at the end of the day, they just care about their own people, like, I mean, their families and whatnot. And that's all you can do. Like,
They also know they're not going to change the
we're,
system, right? Like they're one guy.
correct.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I do not blame them one bit for that being their answer. I do also know quite a few individuals who maybe considered like a 30-year career in the military who were like cutting it off at that 20-year mark and saying, nope, I'm getting out. I'm done with this.
Oh,
It's
I don't
not
know
worth
how everybody
my
in their right mind wouldn't do that at this point.
Well, anyone who's nearing that 20-year mark, nobody I know is considering serving more than their 20 years. And
Yeah, if
out.
you're not completely plugged in, if you're not completely dependent on the regime for your status in those areas, then I don't see why you would stick around at all. Like there's
Nope.
clearly there's a bullet or a target on your head.
Of course. Why would you?
Yeah. Bellophosphorus Night for $10. The action is twofold. Ring out the white boys dying for wars and use defense contractors like Blackwater. Mercs are already in Ukraine. Bonuses are money. The elites have procedural solutions. I mean, yeah, again,
that's great. That's a great solution to have mercenaries be more effective than your actual military. That's never blown up in anyone's face.
I was going to say, once again, as students of history, can't think of any situation. Machiavelli particularly tells you not to do this.
Right.
It's actually very explicit about how this is a terrible plan. But
yes, you can do this. But do you really want to consolidate your hard power in people who, are literally, can be bought off?
Yeah, have no loyalty to you at all.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is a terrible decision. But sure, I mean, yes, it is happening and it is something that's going on, but it is not conducive to the long-term health of the state. But there is no long-term health of the state at this point, right?
That's exactly it. Right. We're stripping
if we can hold on to power. Right. If we can hold on to power for another 6 months to 5 years, that's enough.
It really is. That's the half-life. That's the scary thing is that is the amount of vision of our leadership is literally just it's 2 years at a time. That's the only way they're able to see the world.
Correct. It used to be every 4 years of the presidential election, and now it's every 2 years. Every election is the most important election.
And it only gets shorter because it'll quickly become clear that elections don't matter and only news cycles matter. And that's when things really get fun. But Dat Guy Joe Daddy for $20. Thank you very much. Oh, what about states' rights? Can't some states build an oil refinery on their own without federal approval? I mean, so this is going to be the next frontier, right? Like we're asking questions about like states' rights have been dead since the end of the Civil War. That's the short answer. The 10th Amendment doesn't exist. Hasn't worked for a very long time. So the question of states' rights is really one of who's willing to take regional power and will the federal government be able to put them in line? You see guys like DeSantis, they're pushing the boundaries. They're kind of tempting the federal government to kind of see what they're going to do there. The question is, can the federal government hurt them? Is it worth their time to hurt them? What does that look like? And all these are unanswered questions, right? And I think that's really going to be the big thing is like, can the federal government force states to continue to comply, or is it in such a decrepit state that the states can kind of start governing themselves and actually making independent choices and daring the government to do something? I think we'll continue to see more of that. It's going to be a slow process, but when it happens, it's going to speed up quick. It's one of those things that accelerates very quickly. Like once you hit a threshold, things move faster. They don't slow down. So I think it will be something we see.
Can we talk about the second and third order effects of this concept though, real quick?
Sure.
If you
much as we can on YouTube, yeah.
No. I hear what you're saying. No. I'll keep it YouTube. The issue here is, okay, fine. You have a state starting to create its own best practices, right? And it's what the real concern here is that what if this particular state is actually more successful than the other states?
Right.
Like they can't allow that. So regardless of if it's a good idea for that particular state, if the quality of life in a particular state is higher than the overall quality of life in the United States, they're going to squash it real quick.
Yeah, success is not just not a defense; it's actually actively a
Correct.
problem. Right.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that if one particular state is more successful than another state, and wow, the power grid in this particular state seems to be running just fine, whereas all the others are, having rolling blackouts, they're not going to elevate the other states in power efficiency and effectiveness. They're just going to make sure that individual state is, back in line with the rest.
But the real question is, will they have the ability to do that? And if the answer is
Yeah, of course
yes,
they will.
I'm less sure. Maybe the answer is of course right now, but let's say that the trains are running on time and food supplies aren't arriving and your military is on food stamps and nobody has the ability to take decisive action. Can you actually force these states to do what you want? Again, the answer seems obvious now, but it might not be so obvious in 5 years. Like
Sure.
that's the thing. I think you're right. If as of today, the answer is yes, but the answer might not be yes forever. And when it stops being yes, that's when things get interesting.
Yeah, that they do.
All right, Ronald Fisher for $20. What do you think a patchwork of small absolute monarchies as political formula? All exit, no voice. Local monarchs co-own state traded on the New York Stock Exchange, like Yarvin's plan, seems to be the best for liberty and production of order. Thank you very much for your donation, by the way, Ronald. So I have spoken about this quite a few times, but it has been a while. So if you haven't heard me talk about that, that's no problem. I'm happy to kind of talk about it real quick. Patchwork, of course, everyone knows I'm a Yarvin fan. A lot of my early content, especially on the stuff is about Yarvin, informs a lot of my thinking. I don't think it's Curtis is super bright and always worth listening to. I don't always agree with him. We differ on a number of things. And Patchwork always felt weak. Here's my problem with Patchwork. I like it in theory. In practice, I don't understand how it works. Curtis tried to explain, I think, how the system would end up more or less being enforced when he started writing kind of the gray mirror stuff, but he never really fleshed it out sufficiently. Kind of stopped and started with those posts and never really finished them. It's been a little while since I've seen some of his stuff, so maybe he's gotten into more of it, but last I saw he hadn't. The problem with Yarvin's patchwork system is a couple fold. Like first you need kind of everyone to respect this system in many ways, which is why Yarvin was kind of explaining like a almost a global sovereign that then makes everyone kind of follow then the patchwork model, which is a little messy. He's explained how that would work, but that's not making that actually come into fruition is a little more complicated. My biggest problem with Yarvin's model is I think exit is actually the problem, not the solution. I think that the ability of people to walk out of problems is a huge issue. Yarvin wants to solve that by putting all the power in the monarch, and I'm not necessarily against monarchy, obviously, but that kind of ignores, I think, the role of organic culture. Curtis is right that like power, like culture is downstream from power, but you have to like create institutions and you need generational like memory and quality of people in your society to make it work and to actually build and grow and like retain the value of the things that you're working on. And if your answer to all like political disagreement is exit, then you really end up in a situation where like you're often losing much of that. um I would be interested, I guess. I don't know how much Yarvin is still in with Patchwork. He hasn't really talked about it in a long time, other than kind of having that global sovereign that I think might have been left over from that model. I would be interested to see kind of where he stands with Patchwork now. But those are kind of my thoughts on it. It is kind of a Hoppian like libertarian dream that would be nice, but I don't know if it works practically. But those are my
You know,
thoughts.
Yarvin's like Ayn Rand, like really good at diagnosing the problem, really bad at providing an effective solution.
Yeah, and to be fair, like so am I. So I'm not gonna rip on him for that at all. That's just the nature of the beast in general. If we have solutions,
Oh,
we'd be ruling the world, right?
we have solutions, none of which
Yeah,
we can. Yeah.
I hear you.
Anyway.
All right. Let's see. Matty Ice for $20. Auron, could you ask some of your fancy contacts why there isn't a push to talk about things like demographic disparities and crime? As explaining, people seem willing to entertain spicier options before a rude one. I mean, yeah, I think Maddie, your answers for that are obvious, right? And Alex Kashuda kind of stepped into this a little bit, I think, with Wocal Distance on Twitter a day or two ago, when she kind of, not directly like with crime, but like just in general, like why you're never going to have, like why equity and equality are always going to kind of be uh kind of linked together, and you can never really separate those, and those are the core assumptions of a liberal system, and you're always kind of naturally going to get there. And I think just a lot of people, even people in the new right, are still going to hold on to that. And so I think there are more people, you saw now his name has escaped me, from the Daily Wire, Matt. I can't remember his last name, but everyone knows who I'm talking about. And then uh, what's the other one from? Now I can't remember anyone's name. Ali Stuckey. They were both talking about this, right? They were but kind of both addressing that video that was going around. Matt Walsh, thank you guys. Sorry, my brain just, after so long, I start kind of they were both addressing with that video of the kid like stomping the other kid in the public bathroom. Like they were addressing that, like basically like you're not allowed to talk about the racial aspects that constantly play out in the kind of these crime videos. So there are more mainstream people who are, to be fair, talking about this. There are people who are less terrified of that topic, but of course we all understand it's a third rail, right? Like there no one is confused about why that topic is discussed the way it is and how people approach it. Eventually it's very difficult for people to continue to avoid it, and I think that's why you are seeing more mainstream conservative commentators willing to kind of go places that they wouldn't have gone just 6 months to a year ago. But you don't expect to see change, on that kind of stuff. Always nice when you see guys like Walsh or Stuckey willing to address that with the platforms that they have, but don't expect that one to change overnight for all the reasons you'd expect. Ronald Fisher for $5. Sorry for the confusion. I was talking about the monarchs with loyalty to local people, like the 10,000 Liechtenstein, no New York Stock Exchange traded states. Yarvin loves money over honor. Yeah, I hear you. And again, I am of course very much for regional power. I am very much for accountability in much of the model you're talking about. If I was to have my wish, the states you're talking about do sound superior to what we have. But the problem is, and again, this is what Yarvin did try to address to his credit, is like at this point, what you need is a globalist nationalism, right? Like you need a global order that allows for regional power, because whether we like it or not, the managerial revolution did happen, right? And the consolidation of power has occurred. And those that ignore that truth or try to wish it away will fail because they'll be denying political realities. So as much as I might want that and you might want that, and as much as that might actually be like what's best for humanity or individual nations or people groups, as things stand, something very significant in the global world order has to change. And my inclination would be that, like supply chains falling apart and like reliable global trade falling apart is more likely to bring about the ability for those regional powers to reemerge than any kind of like more constructive agreement between societies, unfortunately. But I think that's your case there. All right, guys. Well, we are done with all of our super chats. Thank you very much for coming by. Just want to plug a few things. First, had the American Mind piece that I was talking about. They were very kind to have me right there. So my piece is up there on the American Mind. If you want to go check that out, it's the front page there. So if you just head to the American Mind's website, it'll be over there. I was also on like Jesse Kelly, I said recently, and I was on Tom Wood's show recently as well. His podcast, really nice guy, very very kind of him to have me on. So if you want to check me out there, you can go to any of those. And I'll probably have a new video coming out in the next few days, so keep your eyes out for that. Wanted to thank some people from, of course, Substack real quick. Many of the usual Substacks, or I should say suspects. That's where I was going with that. But we've got a few new people here. Username 371 join me. Thank you very much for your support. We've of course got Easter Worshipper. We've got F08104AF. We've got AWXYZ. We have user F1F00309. We have Santa. That's right. The big man supports the channel. Jonathan Anomaly.
I love when you say that.
It's
That's like
it's
my
great.
favorite part.
I'm hitting it every time. I'm never, as long as Santa is here, I will be touting that.
I look forward to that every time.
Leading tone, user 5E3485C5, Invisible Game, Rich Love One. Thank all of you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Our hit Easter Worshipper. Just want to make sure I got everybody here real quick. All right. All right, guys. Again, thank you. Really appreciate everyone who came by. I appreciate everyone who super chatted. And of course, I appreciate American Ostrakon for always being a great co-host.
I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.